Hi, I'm Benton Stokes.
And I'm Elane O'Rourke.
And this is Cocktail Theology. Hello.
Hello.
How are you?
Well, I admit that I went ahead and tasted the cocktail before you described it, and I'm very happy with you right now.
It's a tasty one. So this cocktail has, what's the name of the gin?
Nolé?
Nolé.
We think.
It's a dry gin that we tried not that long ago, and one of our friends kindly gave us a bottle, and we've been enjoying it. But it's delicious, and it's in here along with Dolan Blanc, vermouth, lime juice, aromatic bitters, and something special
That we got at a Scandinavian big box store,
Yes.
which shall go unnamed.
So I don't have a name for this cocktail yet, but it should probably be unpronounceable and have umlauts. So I'll have to come up with one.
Cake tart.
Lingonberfig. So the lingonberry is also known as the cowberry or the partridge berry.
Those seem like different things to me.
I think they're just grabbing at names over in Sweden. I'm just not really sure what's going on. But the lingonberry is from an evergreen shrub, and it bears an edible berry.
Okay.
And they are grown primarily in Sweden, but you'll also find them in Finland and other Scandinavian places. But it's very tasty.
It is very tasty. No, I really like the proportions on it. It came out really, really well. Because I'm always terrified of the oversweet, as you know. But the proportions on this are beautiful.
Pretty good. But I think you're right. The gin made a difference, because originally I tried it with Ringpur, which we like a lot, but it's not a sturdy gin in the sense that it stands up really well with other strong flavors.
Right. So I want to read you something that I saw today.
Okay.
And this happened really recently. So back in, I want to say February, the Southern Baptist Convention, which is, I believe, the largest, it's supposed to be a fellowship, but it's in fact a denomination. We can talk about that another time.
Okay.
The largest Protestant denomination in the United States.
Okay.
So back in February, the pastor, whose name is Rick Warren, who founded Saddleback Church,
Yes.
40 plus years ago, was the first really well-known megachurch of the modern era. He was a business person. He did his research. He was just smart about how to do this. Really, really smart and good business. All of those
Right.
things.
I know Rick Warren because of his books, The Purpose-Driven Church.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. So he's been big in the Southern Baptists for a very long time. He retired, I think, last year, I want to say, but has still been involved in the church, of course.
Sure.
So in February, the Southern Baptist Convention removed the Saddleback Churches from the Southern Baptist Convention, kicked them out,
Okay.
and said that they kicked them out because they were putting women in top leadership positions, including ordaining women.
Okay.
So Rick Warren appealed, and he appealed on the basis, well, he appealed on many bases. But the interesting part of it is Rick Warren, longtime Southern Baptist pastor, extremely successful,
Yes.
very famous, appeals a traditional ruling about a long-time traditional holding of this particular fellowship denomination. So he is, wow, I never thought I would say this. He's a little Martin Luther-y in this.
Oh, he is, isn't he?
Yeah, because he doesn't want to leave the Southern Baptists. That's not his goal. But he's pointing out what he considers to be a flaw.
Right.
Okay? So there are lots of interesting questions, but of course, the most interesting question right now is, what happens when a church body or a small church, whatever, bucks culture? When something it's held onto for a long time
Right.
is now antiquated in terms of the culture, but says, darn it, we're gripping this, we're hanging on to it. What does that mean?
What does that mean?
And what should we do about it, if anything? And what does it say about churches and pastors? And
Right. Right. Well, and I mean, I don't have the data in front of me, but I know I've read many, many articles starting even before COVID about how American churches, congregations are declining in numbers. and that fewer and fewer people, particularly as you go younger and younger, are making the decision to attend a church or even identify themselves as religious or to adhere to a particular religion. The younger you go, from boomers all the way down, by the time you get to Gen Z, it's a very, very small percentage of Gen Z folks that identify as belonging to a church or a particular religion. And so clearly in this country and probably globally, but I know a lot of the things that I've read have really focused on what's going on in America right now, but numbers are dwindling and people don't value having that type of a spiritual affiliation
Correct.
in their lives anymore.
Correct.
And even people in our generations, less and less,
Right.
are affiliating with specific churches.
Right. Well, I'm not affiliated with a specific church anymore.
Right.
Yes. So all of that is true. My understanding is that Asia, Africa are still booming.
Okay.
But the view of authority is different in
Sure.
some of those places.
Right.
So Indonesia, various countries in Africa, the view of authority is a more solid. Authority is a more solid authority,
Yeah.
if you will.
Yeah.
Whereas in the United States, in Britain, in most of Europe, in Canada, authority is a tough one.
Yeah.
Right? We don't love authority.
Well, Americans
to begin with.
definitely don't.
Yeah. So there's that. So I think some of the generational stuff is you know what, we don't actually need authority. And the other is, we've talked about this a million times, that the growth of the American church was also the growth of the Western expansion, or
Yes.
the growth of the suburbs, or the growth of the whatever. And those places played the role of community centers.
Yeah.
Right? And that's just not the way we live anymore.
Not at all.
So setting aside religion entirely, you'd have to come up with a good reason.
But what's interesting to me about this, what came out in the news today, is that you would think that Southern Baptists would be clinging to every possible congregant they could get their hands on.
Wouldn't you just?
And yet they are willing to stand very firm on a concept that probably most American Christians find to be archaic.
I would completely agree with you. And I would say even if you're talking about Catholicism, the tradition there is so important, and there's good reasons for it. I mean, setting aside the problems with having an all-male priesthood that we've seen, there's still some good theological reasons for it. Not so much in the way the Southern Baptists are dealing with this. So they kicked him out, and then they reaffirmed not ordaining women, not having women in leadership. So that was the big vote. And apparently 88%, I'm looking at the number to make sure, 88% of the people who voted in this, it was a good large group, voted against women being in leadership and being ordained. Now,
Wow.
I'd be really interested to see a picture of the people who were there.
Yeah.
What I found really interesting about this is Warren's appeal, the basis on which Rick Warren said, here's what's going on. So here's what he said. He stood up in front of 13,000 Southern Baptists gathered in New Orleans to make his case. Here's a quote. "No one is asking any Southern Baptist to change their theology," right? Which is an argument we've made about everything for a long time.
Yeah.
"I'm not asking you to agree with my church. I'm asking you to act like a Southern Baptist, who have historically agreed to disagree on dozens of doctrines in order to act on a common mission." And then he said that he wasn't expecting the appeal to succeed, but he wanted to push the conversation that's been stagnant for years. Okay?
Okay.
And then he said, "I want to speak up for millions of Southern Baptist women. I believe their spiritual gifts, their leadership gifts, and talents are being wasted." And he said that he considered himself well-positioned to make the case given his tender heart and thick skin. So he's definitely trying to point out the legitimacy of women in leadership in the church.
Right.
But he's also saying that's not what we're based on. So what the hey? And I think it's the what the hey that I personally find interesting.
Yeah.
Watching the Southern Baptist Convention, this very conservative group, that the hills it is willing to die on have been fascinating to me. The hills have not been things like Jesus is Lord over the church, or we should give to the poor, or the 2 commandments and the 10 commandments are the same thing. It hasn't been that kind of stuff. It's been whether women should be ordained. It's been which candidate you should endorse. It's been those kinds of things.
Yeah.
I I find that interesting.
Yeah, me too.
So the other thing that Warren said, which is not in the article I was just quoting from, is that he pointed out to them that they were standing on a political principle to the detriment of the mission of the church, which in his perspective is reaching out with the gospel.
Yes.
Okay? And his view is if you've got women who are gifted and talented and ready to do this, you put them in because you've got a mission to do. And that's
it.
And it's going to further the mission.
Yeah.
But calling them out on the idea that it's political, whether you're thinking of it as political within the denomination or political in the larger world, is important.
Yeah, that's crazy. Well, I mean, I know that the Southern Baptists, because they are so large in number, and, well, they have become a bit of a force politically over the years. And they've had very outspoken, controversial leaders, controversial in the face of culture.
Yep.
You know, they've taken very hard stands, not just on women, but on gays and on all kinds of things. Again,
immigration.
Yes, and immigration. Again, bucking culture. It's so interesting to me, and I mean, I know this is indicative of what's going on in other parts of subcultures and things that are going on in our country right now, but the hills you mentioned that people and organizations are willing to die on in order to preserve some kind of a norm that they believe exists, first of all, and that is important for some reason. And in my opinion, I think you would be really hard pressed to find anything in the Bible, particularly in the teachings of Jesus, that say women shouldn't be talking, women shouldn't be ministering, women shouldn't be in leadership, women shouldn't be, because Jesus, we know, was surrounded by really smart, talented, gifted women. And so why then would they choose to die on this particular hill in 2023?
Right. There is one place, and it's in Paul, and it's in Corinthians. The Corinthians have written him a letter saying, we're falling apart, help us out. And he's responding to the we're falling apart. And so he says that women shouldn't have authority over men in this. But what he's saying is, you need to create some order here.
Right.
And you are separating yourselves from the surrounding culture. Here's how you create order. And Paul was nothing if not practical, right? So he knew if he kind of followed the Jewish line and separated men and women, that would tone down the controversy a bit. So that whole section of Corinthians is all about how to keep order, when people should talk, when they shouldn't talk, blah, blah. And it's not just about women, it's about all those things.
All kinds of
it's
things.
really about how to order things.
Yeah.
Okay? But even so, the Southern Baptists, and they're not alone in this, the Southern Baptists aren't even giving a actual biblical argument about this. I mean, they will say something like, women are not authorized, and they'll quote the Paul thing. But it's not really a biblical argument, because if you look in other places in the Bible, women are preaching, women are singing, women are and even in Jesus' own ministry.
That's what I'm saying.
There were women.
Right.
Right. So it's not about that.
Yeah, it's not about that at all.
And it's not about these principles that they're holding, so strongly. So here's a question. We normally conceive of Jesus as bucking his culture. His culture was not where he was, and he was bucking the culture. What's the difference between someone like Jesus, who I think most of us would consider, who take that stance, consider him a rebel?
Yes.
And what's the difference between the rebel and, well, we can just stay with Jesus, and the Pharisees hanging on to their particular, what's the difference there? Why do we think the Southern Baptists are out of touch and messed up and being vindictive, and Jesus is okay for bucking the culture? What's going on there?
Right. Well, I believe that Jesus' motivations were different.
Okay.
There are so many accounts in Scripture, in the Gospels, where Jesus was constantly spending time with his Heavenly Father. He was getting off to himself and praying and fasting, and as Christians, as Jesus followers, really emulating Jesus, not only living out what he taught, but also emulating the way he lived, is part of a vibrant Christian faith that's growing and deepening and evolving. The Pharisees, on the other hand, were the ones that were adhering to kind of these very ingrained beliefs, things they had held on to for a long time, things that they thought were right, things that they thought were important, but they had sort of, I mean, Jesus points this out in Matthew. They were really holding these traditions and these tenets in higher regard, in higher importance, than actually seeking out what God might want them to do, or what was necessary or needed for the culture of the time. And so it was like their belief system that they held on to so tightly, they couldn't see past that to understand that there might be more, they might be different. And so I think that's part of it. And if you're looking at the way Jesus was, he was countercultural.
Absolutely.
And the Southern Baptist, if Jesus were here behaving like Jesus is behaving, would probably consider him a renegade or dangerous.
Right.
Just the same way that the Pharisees did.
Right. Okay. Absolutely, with all of it. I love that you tied in the Matthew depiction. The Matthean is what we say, the Matthean depiction of Jesus. That's awesome. That's exactly right. So maybe the question then is, well, maybe there are a couple of questions. One of them is, whoever is saying whatever they're saying, what do they consider to be the dominant culture? So my bet is the Southern Baptist Convention feels the pressure of the culture, but considers themselves the dominant culture, the true believers, the absolute faithful, whatever. So they're really the holders of true reality. Okay? And I'm going to bring this up in just a second, why I'm saying this. Jesus would also have said that theirs was the dominant culture.
Right.
Okay? Would also have said that Pharisees were the dominant culture. But what's interesting is if you look at the Southern Baptists and you look at culture, I mean, really look at culture, not at the political blah, 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 not at any of that. But they're so far off as far as just the basic culture goes.
So out of touch, right.
So they're not actually representing the dominant culture.
Right.
They're hanging on to this remnant. And I believe, and I think this is what Warren believes, not because it's holy, but because they need it in order to hold on to their institution.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
Much like the Pharisees.
Right.
So that means Rick Warren is Jesus. I love that image. We should, no, I'm totally kidding. But I think he would be amused by this conversation.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's great. So then what we were getting to is this. The Southern Baptists, as we know, have been more of a political party than a denomination for a very long time, starting in 1979 and then going into 1980 with the Republican platform and with all of the guys that, you know the names of better than I do, who were the thinkers behind the moral majority, the thinkers behind all these guys, and who wound up being entrenched in the Southern Baptists.
Right.
The Southern Baptist Convention has been the religious arm of the Republican Party for a very long time.
Yeah.
The more conservative, it's not even conservative, the more reactionary the Republican Party gets, the more the Southern Baptists cling to what they're doing. Because it's not about faith.
No, it's not.
It's not about the mission of the church.
No.
It's not about Jesus. It's about holding on to political power.
Yes.
Which is why your connection to the Pharisees is so perfect.
Yeah.
I would be really interested to know, I mean, I could probably do this off the top of my head for a while, but I'd be really interested to know, looking at the various groups that have been dominant, that cling to some arcane aspect of their belief system, while the culture around them changes. I'd be really interested to know how many of them were actually trying to preserve their cultural power or their political power.
Right. Yeah. That would be really interesting to know.
You may remember that a few decades ago, the Taliban blew up all the ancient Buddhas out in the deserts of Afghanistan.
Yes.
Okay. And it was tragic. The Taliban has been cash-strapped for a while. They are now selling tickets to people to tour the blown-up Buddhas.
Oh, my God.
Okay?
That's
now,
ridiculous.
so many things wrong with this.
So many things.
So many things wrong. But how interesting is that? Because they're not selling tickets to their exposition of their Muslim beliefs.
Right.
They're selling tickets to the destruction of the false people.
Which is just a demonstration of their power, political power.
Exactly. Exactly. See, we won. We destroyed the infidel. It would be a little bit like the Crusades coming back and saying, but I'm serious, right? It'd be like it'd have to be the second Crusade, but it'd be like the Crusades coming back and saying, okay, here we are.
Remember that time we did this?
Wasn't that awesome? I cut off the heads of 18 women. You know what I mean? I mean, it's got that kind of sense to it, right?
Yeah, seriously.
So I want to suggest to you that as we're talking about this, that the Southern Baptist move is not about faith at all. It's not about the mission of the gospel at all. It's not even about Southern Baptist or Baptist principles at all. It's about how do we continue to put forth the political party behind which we have thrown our weight and our own power within it and within our little part of the culture. How do we continue to move along our social agenda?
Yeah.
Rather than, well, Jesus said, and so.
Wow. Yeah.
And my last word on this is, one of the things I teach all the time is when church, like Jesus's church, and culture clash, culture wins. Culture wins. Mm-hmm. So in their little world, their little culture's winning. In the bigger world, who knows what's happening?
Right. Listeners, we want to hear from you, particularly if you, I don't know, we're probably too progressive for most Southern Baptists, but if you happen to be a Southern Baptist or attend a Southern Baptist church or an evangelical of any stripe, we would love to hear from you.
Especially if you think I'm going to rot in hell for preaching. That would be amazing, because I'd love to hear about why that is. Think that.
Yeah. You can contact us at cocktailtheology.com. We also love ideas that you have for other episodes for Cocktails too. And we have new episodes that come out every Thursday.
Yes, we do. And when is the Jim Martin one coming out?
Father James Martin, Jesuit priest from New York City, pro-queer, wonderful guy. Great conversationalist.
Yes.
Had a great time chatting with him. So that episode should come out in just a couple of weeks, maybe 1 week from when this one airs. So we're talking beginning of July.
I love that. That's going to be awesome. And if you didn't listen to the interview with John Birdsall, particularly if you care about food or you care about literature or you care about the queer experience in the United States, really, it's just a wonderful interview. So I really encourage you to listen to that one too.
So good. And that one's great because you guys have history. Yeah. So it was really nice to eavesdrop on that one.
Absolutely.
We appreciate you guys listening. Please share us and subscribe.
Yay.
Till next time.
Bye.